Hello, my name is Michael Coffey of Tea Geek.
And I'm Eric Scott, and today's guest on Let's Talk Tea is Dr. Selena Ahmed. She's Assistant Professor of Sustainable Food Systems and Bioenergy at Montana State University, and we're partly here to talk to her at least about a paper she recently published in the journal PLOS One titled Effects of Extreme Climate Events on Tea Functional Quality, Validate Indigenous Farmer Knowledge and Sensory Preferences in Tropical China. So welcome to the show.
That's a mouthful.
So thanks for joining us. I kind of want to start our discussion a little bit. So the people that are watching are usually know a bunch of things about tea, but maybe not as much about the climate change aspect of it. So why climate change? How is climate change predicted to impact tea specifically?
Absolutely. So I'll kind of start with your initial question, which is why climate change. And I started doing research in tea gardens in China, specifically Yunnan Province in southwestern China in 2006. And at that point, I was very much focused on how farmers perceived environmental variation and how that variation impacted their tea systems, including the quality, which they experienced through taste and the medicinal properties. And I wasn't specifically focused on climate change. However, farmers kept on bringing me back to the question of how the climate was changing and how both seasonal variation as well as longer climate trends really were impacting their agricultural systems, including their tea systems. And so farmers, in many ways, or in all ways, really directed me to that research question on thinking about climate change on their tea systems, as well as what that meant for their livelihoods.
So that's interesting. The farmers actually were concerned about this.
Yeah, it was definitely something that farmers were concerned about. One of my first field seasons in 2007, I was doing ecological sampling, and at that point I was very much focused on how biodiversity within and around the tea systems was impacting quality, and that's what I was focusing on in those days. And I remember having a cup of tea with a farmer, and it was during the dry season. And as we all know, that there's a different quality during the dry season, and several days later the East Asian monsoon hit, and I was at the same household, and I remember the head of the household says, "It's changed, the taste has changed," and I was really intrigued what she meant. In just 1 week, the tea from her same tea gardens had changed flavor. And then throughout my time in Yunnan working with farmers as well as tea traders and connoisseurs, I've really come to understand that there is a concern that it's not only seasonal variability of tea, but it's also a longer trend, and farmers are definitely concerned.
And so they're actually seeing they're noticing experientially change.
Yeah. Absolutely. So farmers are noticing change in multiple agro-ecosystems that they manage, and during their lifetimes they are seeing changes in their tea systems. They are saying that the tea systems are more resilient than some of their other fields. You know, tea, it's a woody plant species, so it's a lot more resilient than a lot of other crops, and so it is a more resilient system. But they have started to notice changes, and one of the main changes is just the variability. So the spring harvest used to start sort of in my field sites in southwestern China in about March, and every year it's been getting a little earlier, but there's also a lot of variability in that, and so that's one thing that farmers are noticing. And then the other thing they're noticing are just sort of the changes in the quality, and it's not predictable at all, so it's not like a trend that's going in any specific direction. It's just a lot more variability.
So things are kind of being more random than they used to be.
Right.
The farmers used to be able to know that about this week we'd be able to start picking, and it's going to be like this in that month and so forth, and that sureness is breaking down.
Yeah, absolutely. So there used to be like when the tea buds, the spring harvest started, it was usually associated with other ecological cues, like specific fruit trees blooming and specific birds singing. And now with sort of the more unpredictable climate patterns, farmers aren't able to sort of link those traditional cues as anymore. And so they're not really sure when the start date will be, and they were a lot more sure in the past. So there's definitely concern on that end.
So
And
this is more changes in so I mean, people normally think of, when they think of climate change, they think of warming, global warming, but we're talking more about changes in rainfall patterns, right?
Right, yeah, so it actually really depends where the tea gardens are. So in the +1 paper that we're talking about today, it's really focused on rain. I asked farmers about both sort of rain patterns as well as temperature. And in southwestern China and Sichuan, the farmers are very much, rain is much more the scenario. However, in different parts of China and other tea growing areas that we're continuing to expand our research, there's different climate variables that are really the issue. So it's not that all tea farmers are experiencing the same climatic patterns, but for the +1 paper, it's a very farmers aren't as sure as what's happening, how temperatures are impacting their system. They definitely are experiencing, they sort of perceive that temperatures have increased, but they're not really sure what that's doing to the tea, but they have much stronger perception and understanding of what's happening to the flavor based on more extreme rains.
And that brings it, something that I noticed in there was, or whether it was in that paper or something else when I was, kind of reading, preparing for today, was you did something about verifying that indeed the farmers could taste fresh leaf and sort of.
I think
right?
that was something I told you about. Yeah, I heard Selena said and heard secondhand already. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like
yeah, so true.
Wherever that came from, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting question. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is just to that farmers can taste, just like harvest a fresh leaf and taste the difference. Is that the question?
Yeah, can they?
Yeah, so absolutely. One of my favorite things to do when I'm in the tea gardens is just to chew on fresh leaf. I think it's a really delightful experience. And when I have been walking in tea gardens, especially my main field sites in Sichuan, that farmers are able to, detect a difference, not just on the brewed tea, but it's right there when you're chewing on a fresh leaf, and which makes so much sense because obviously the.
Can you taste the difference?
I can taste the difference now, definitely more than I could initially. So I've definitely become a lot more attuned to it, and I have been working in Yunnan the longest, and so I feel like I'm much more able to discern variation in teas in the regions where I've been working the longest in those tea gardens compared to ones that I may not have been to before. So.
You're dialed in on.
Confident. Yeah, I don't feel confident that I can just go to a tea garden and be like, taste a leaf and say what season it is. But in the field sites that I've been working, if I was to get a fresh leaf, I feel comfortable saying that I would be able to detect if it was when it was harvested.
Yeah. So I guess we can talk a little bit about sort of some of the what the effects actually were. So, you mentioned the quality is worse, but one of the cool things about your work, I think, is relating that to the actual chemistry in the leaf and the functional quality, which is that's probably a term that people in the tea industry might be familiar with. I'm not sure, but this idea of functional quality is things like antioxidants and caffeine and the stuff that we get asked about at tea shops all the time. To sort of ad nauseum. So you've noticed the sort of dilution effect of the monsoon season. So can you describe that a little bit more?
Sure. And so specifically about the functional quality or what's happening with the monsoons, or sort of how those link together?
Well, I guess sort of both. So the with the onset of the monsoon, you see this drop in quality, and so what chemicals are responsible for that, or
Right, absolutely. So for this paper, we focused on the main phytochemicals that provide antioxidant properties for human consumption, and so the focus was really on that set of compounds as well as caffeine. So what's basically having like a physiological effect in humans, and that's sort of the functional quality that I was very much focused on. And previous studies have also showed, including another paper that I had worked on, is that those ECGC and all of those sort of catechin and antioxidant compounds, as well as methylxanthines, that consumers are able to taste those compounds and variation in those compounds. So a previous study that I did showed that teas that had higher levels of the catechins as well as methylxanthines were also associated with stronger taste by tea masters that I had interviewed, and so I sort of.
Can I just interject real quick? So methylxanthines, the big one in tea is caffeine, right?
Is caffeine, right? So these are the ones that are really having the physiological effect on our bodies, and so that's when I'm talking about functional quality. There's lots of ways we can define tea quality, and I sort of chose to focus on functional quality in terms of what it's doing functionally in the human body, that most studies have validated. Thousands of studies are sort of looking at those compounds. So those are the ones that I was really interested in. And then our collaborative tea team working at Tufts also is very interested in other compounds that sort of give tea its aroma and properties, and those are the volatile compounds. And so those haven't been as linked at the moment to health properties of tea. Right. So this paper very much focuses on what's happening in physiologically for humans. And so those are the sort of compounds I've been studying for a while, and in my previous research looking at how those varied in different tea gardens, and I sort of continued looking at those compounds because that's what is physiologically active in our bodies. And basically, when the sampling that's in this paper happens within 2 weeks, and within this 2-week sampling, there is a significant difference and notable difference in the size of the tea leaves. So basically, the rains hit. It's been really dry for months and months, right, since the previous kind of autumn, and so it's a really dry season, and so the plants are pretty stressed. And then when we had done the sampling, it was an extreme drought in Yunnan, one of the most severe droughts in recorded history. So the plants are really stressed, and they've really probably amplified their secondary compounds. And then suddenly the rains hit, the East Asian monsoon hits, and the leaves, basically double in size in terms of length and the weight. And so looking at the chemistry between the leaves collected in the beginning and the leaves harvested at the end, there's this reduction of about 50% of some of those key antioxidant compounds.
That's because they're not making them at a rate that can keep up with the growth of the leaves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. So we're not sure if are the plants less stressed out right now, or is it, well, now, basically it's this dilution effect that the rains have come, they're growing, and they're not actually producing that same amount. That's sort of the mechanism we think is responsible, is that dilution effect. But the plants also may be more stressed, obviously, during that drought. And which is interesting because that drought actually resulted for farmers in really beautiful tea. Everybody said it was more bitter, more sweet, had more gan, that sort of sweet lingering aftertaste. And then when the rains hit, that dilution of chemistry sort of resulted in more diluted tea, which translated to a drop in the prices that farmers are getting for that tea, and obviously a drop in their livelihoods. And so sort of with climate change, they're actually seeing a scenario which is really promising for them, where they're getting higher quality tea, and then in the same year they're sort of getting this a lower quality, more diluted tea. So within the same year, they're sort of farmers in these communities are experiencing just more extreme events that are parallel to what's happening with climate. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me take a step back and look at this same issue from sort of a different angle, and that's from the tea drinker, just the not industry person, not farmer, not tea geeks, but just the run-of-the-mill person that goes into a tea shop and gets some tea. This greater variability. And I'll oversimplify here and see if you still agree. So climate change is causing more variability. More variability means potentially that tea, as climate change continues, hopefully it won't, but that could result in tea being less healthy for people, because those functional compounds are, whether it's diluted or whatever it is, there's less of them in there.
Yeah.
And so you get less benefits from tea if climate change continues.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of for the monsoon tea, so if monsoons become longer and a cup of tea, harvested from the monsoon has, let's say, 50% less antioxidants because it's been diluted. So some of those studies, the clinical studies that say, for tea to have these properties for the heart or cancer preventative properties, you need to drink 4 cups of tea. But now if the antioxidants are 50% less, suddenly you have to drink 8 cups of tea to get that same amount of functional quality that you're consuming, right? So you're just going to have to drink a little bit more during those seasons. However, there's also the season where the antioxidants are a little amplified, right, during those droughts. So really depending on what's happening. So definitely when the monsoons hit, you're going to be having to drink more to get that same functional quality. And then
most people drink teas that they don't know when they were harvested or where they were harvested.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so if that monsoon, that lower quality window
it increases,
then you have to assume, without unless you know where your tea was sourced, which I happen to think, like the clearer the supply chain is, the better,
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just getting tea in the grocery store or at this, the tea shop or whatever, and you don't find out those when was it picked and where was it picked and so forth, you just have to kind of assume that over time it's going to be less good for you. And not that it won't be good for you, but that
right. Unless you know that you're getting spring harvested teas or
right,
whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a company provides antioxidant values or something. Which
right, there are some companies that test their teas and have that data available, which yay for them.
Yeah.
Right, and also say like the date and the season and the year the tea was harvested and processed.
State does that.
Yeah, and definitely like even just within a few months of storage, the antioxidants are degrading. So it's really important for multiple reasons for that information to be provided.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will be a trend in sort of the tea market, as people will start to sort of put dates.
I think it's going to be. Actually, this morning I was just looking at an office mate had a tin of some Tazo, very generic, just China green tips, right? Who knows what that means? And the one thing they decided to put in the ingredients, the one piece of detail, is it says ingredients, spring harvested green tea.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So, I think that's interesting that they didn't instead choose,
province or something.
Yeah, the name of the place or, some other adjective or whatever for it, and they chose the season. So
yeah, and that's interesting, and it's interesting it's in the ingredients and not just like the main label also.
Right, right. The main label is like really vague as to what it is. It just says it's tea from China.
Right,
So
right.
that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So it might be, interesting to see if that's they must think that their consumers know that spring means good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put that on there.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Right.
So we talked about the customer point of view. Is there anything that the farmers can do to sort of mitigate these effects of climate change? Is there anything that tea farmers can?
And I have a sub-question to that one,
Sure.
so go ahead and answer that, but then I have a follow-up.
Okay.
Okay, so I think it also, again, really depends on the geographic location of the farm. My main field sites, as I mentioned earlier, are in southwestern China, in Yunnan Province, specifically in Sichuan. And over there, the indigenous communities that I work with manage tea in agro-forests. So in addition to monocultures or tea plantations where tea sort of grows to 1 or 2 meters tall, tea also grows in agroforest because in its natural state, the tea plant is a woody tree that can grow to 15 meters or 20 meters. And in the agroforest, so farmers that manage both agroforest as well as tea plantations that are sort of so the agroforests are like shade grown, kind of like a shade.
Like wild pu-erh.
Yeah, they're definitely cultivated, but it's more of that, yeah, like a shade.
They're wild with air quotes.
Yeah, wild, but I would say it's a shade-grown polyculture system, and versus sort of the open plantations where tea is a bush, and farmers definitely will, in those communities, will say that the tea in the agroforest is more resilient to climate variability, including the extreme droughts and the extreme monsoons, than are their tea shrubs. So they find that really important, that sort of management.
Is that just because they have deeper root systems, or?
Yeah, so part of it is
microclimate because of the canopy too.
Absolutely. So it's definitely like the ecosystem services that are provided by like that diversified structure. There's a canopy and there's different plants in the environment. There's more of a buffer, and then there's that microclimate variation like you're talking about, Michael. And then Eric, there's also deeper roots, right? So a lot of the tea plantations they use clonal propagules, and so the roots are not as deep. Whereas in the agroforest, the roots, if you look at the side of some mountains where they've been cut in Yunnan, you can see how some of the tea roots go really, really, really deep versus some of the clonal propagules where the roots don't get as deep. So that's another one, is growing tea from seed versus sort of a grafting is also regarded to be more sort of resilient to variations, and then also just having a diversified system where you're not.
It's a very long taproot, right? But but like a cutting or something like that, it has more of a diverse.
Right, and like a network.
Kind of
yeah.
Network. Okay.
Yeah. And then also grow, so in some of the villages that I work in, there will be like 15 different land races of tea. So again, having like a diverse genetic diversity of tea within the system versus sort of this more monoculture model. So a lot of the key ecological components that are good for sustainability and sustainable food systems also seem to translate really well to the tea system. And then that's definitely like in Yunnan, where the issue is much more, too much water or sometimes is drought. And then in other parts of China, there's different things that farmers are concerned about. So a little bit more on the eastern side of China and a little bit more of the north, farmers are more concerned about frost that's coming. And one thing that they're starting to do, sort of like frost that will come irregularly during the early spring season, and which causes like the leaf to burn. And there's a few technologies that they're working with agricultural extension agents and the Tea Research Institute over there to sort of mitigate that. And that is more using technology like covering the fields with some sort of cloth, and having these big giant fans that don't let any sort of moisture or frost settle on the leaves. So there's kind of two sort of ways I'm seeing farmers sort of managing for this. One's more for often ecological management, and one's more like technological management in the system.
So now I have two things. The original one, which I'll get to in a second, and that makes me, like your genetic diversity thing makes me think there's a farmer here in Washington State who has been doing experimental tea growing. He's got, I think, 5 acres. And he's kind of got it planted where each row is a different cultivar, essentially. And when I went up to visit and kind of look at his setup, it was the spring after we had a pretty strong winter here, and he said, "Yeah, I'm kind of bummed. I'm going to have to take out this." There was one row that was dead.
Oh, interesting.
And he's like, "Yeah, the frost came, and that one died." And he's like, "I'm kind of bummed because I really liked the flavor, but it couldn't live here,
Yeah.
And so if you had multiple, like that's an on the ground real thing where one cultivar didn't make it, but if you have multiple cultivars, you at least have some way of saying, okay, well, that one had really great flavor. We'll see if it comes back again, and then we can mix that in, but it's not going to make it through a bad winter."
It's not going to be our entire field.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, because obviously if that had been the whole field, he would have been screwed. And then, so the thing I wanted to get back to is we had a viewer question that was related to kind of this whole thing of climate change. This is from Clancy Rogers, who Eric. And she was asking, she is had tea plants in her yard, as I do. I have I have 2 cultivars in my yard, and we both have tried to make tea out of it, and we both had the experience that it was terrible.
How did you process it?
I'll get to the question.
Okay.
I'll ask the question first. I basically just tried stuff, I know how tea is processed, I know what the stages are, I'll just try some. Yeah, and it tasted, I'll say that early experiments tasted worse than recent ones. The recent ones start to taste like tea, the previous ones are like I was chewing on a hedge somewhere. But anyway, so her question was with the changing climate, does that mean either backyard farmers, like small, or whether backyard farmers or just small landholders, small farmers, are more likely to, could that change the market and either geographically and field size kind of ideas, so that people like her or myself might have a chance of having something that they could make their own tea.
Because Washington doesn't have a monsoon climate, right?
Yeah, we don't have a monsoon climate, but yeah. But over time, who knows what we'll get,
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely with changing climatic patterns, it seems to suggest that areas that were once considered really high quality may be lower quality, and areas where it's sort of been lower quality may be worse quality, and in some areas may become better quality. So really depending where the tea garden is. I've heard some farmers say, that they have a sort of a gradient where their tea grows in different elevations, that sort of during the springtime, because it's becoming a little warmer, the gradient or the altitude where pest infect and infest the tea gardens and actually cause some positive chemistry in terms of flavor to happen, that elevation is getting a little higher, and so some of their tea gardens that were considered like their lower quality are actually becoming higher quality because of that change. But I've also heard sort of the opposite scenario, that some of the higher quality tea gardens are becoming lower. So it's really complex, and it really depends where you're located. And I think in terms of just sort of thinking about looking at climate change, it's not like a necessarily a doomsday scenario. It presents opportunities as well as challenges, and so I think that's why it's really important to study and looking at it in a complex way from different disciplinary aspects, as well as looking at in different geographic areas, and then measuring as many parameters as possible to sort of get the complete picture.
That's a great summary, a great place to end. I think we have to wrap things up now. But yeah, things are changing, and we don't necessarily know for better or for worse always. So you can find out, or where. So if the viewers are interested in learning more about the project, there's a website for it at tclimate.org. And then I don't know.
If you're watching this live, it's in the showcase. And I will also add to the showcase Eric's and my Google Plus page. Mm-hmm. And I'll be sure to get it in the description for YouTube for YouTube viewers.
And if you're watching it on YouTube and you're not watching it live and you have questions for Dr. Ahmed, please leave them in the comments or contact one of us, and we'll pester her to follow up.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Anything else you want to promote, or any website?
For those watching it live, we're going to, after the show, do the regular Sunday tea salon. So watch that, follow the Tea Geek page, and you'll see an invitation to the salon where we'll kind of kick back and be off the air and have more conversation. So. That happens every Sunday at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern.
Yeah.
Is that what time it is there? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's 5 o'clock, yeah.
All right, so anything you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody, and thank you both for the interview. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Absolutely. It was great meeting you face to face, and hopefully we will meet again at some point. So. Excellent,
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Until next time, drink tea, think tea, and talk tea.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.